Welcome to Brandon Hall Group's HCMx Radio, the only podcast in the HCM arena that weaves current market research, HR technology, and industry leaders into each episode. Our HCMx Radio host is our Chief Operating Officer and Principal HCM Analyst, Rachel Cook.
Hi, I'm Rachel Cook. I'm the CEO of Brandon Hall Group and the host of our podcast, HCMx Radio Podcast. I'd like to welcome with me today David Wentworth, Brandon Hall Group's Principal Learning Analyst. Hi, David. How are you? Good, good. And also with us is Amit, Garg, the CEO and founder of Upside Learning. Welcome, Amit. How are you today?
I'm very good, Rachel. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Great. And those that are here watching or listening in, thank you for joining us. And a little bit about Emmit, who you may or may not know. Emmit is passionate about improving organization performance through better learning solutions and has been involved in the workplace learning domain for about 2 decades. So he brings a lot of experience based on the work that they offer or provide with their clients and over his career journey. He heads up the learning consulting practice to support organizations resolve business and training challenges through learning solutions. He also provides the vision and direction to the company and works with key leaders in all functions. Today, we're going to be talking about, or it's kind of a follow-on discussion to a recent webinar that they had, David and Amit, just a few weeks back on gamification and workplace learning. And so, we want to kind of continue that discussion. It was an interesting webinar, and there was a lot of follow-on questions, and so we want to kind of cover those today. Before we begin, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what some of your hobbies, or how did you get started in the learning space?
Sure. So it's quite interesting. I kind of almost landed in the learning space by chance. So, by education, qualification, I'm an engineer, a chemical engineer. I always wanted to be an engineer, but after spending a couple of years on the shop floor of a chemical manufacturing unit, I decided that was really not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I moved on to do an MBA and was interested in marketing and sales domains, spent next 3 years in the automobile industry, in logistics, in sales, but I think I didn't like that either. Sales was not my cup of tea, especially car sales. And then something interesting happened. It was the dot-com era, year 2000, when a friend of friend, through them, I got into a dot-com company which was trying to get something done for education domain over the internet. So, trying to prep students for exams, etc. So I came in there as a product manager. It never happened what they wanted to do, as happened with a lot of dot-com companies. But we found a niche for ourselves, which was in corporate learning. And what I really liked about the domain was instructional design and e-learning creation was very close to advertising, how you do advertising. There were so many parallels in that, and that really got me hooked. So I've got certified in instructional design over the years, and of course learned through practice and interacting with industry leaders over the years, but I have stayed on. So it's been about 20 years.
Oh, interesting. So you were a pioneer or a kind of early on in your career, you saw the vision of where learning had to be, because I don't think learning was always thought as marketing in the past. And now we see that more so than ever, that there's a very close connection, and it's really important that the learning is that you have a good communication plan and a good marketing plan to be able to attract people, because you can have the greatest content, you can have the greatest program, but if people are not aware of how it can be useful and applicable and meaningful, then it goes nowhere.
Yeah, you're right. I can't say I spotted it early. I just landed and I liked it, and I've been here, and I'm now learning more about there are even bigger overlaps between what we do in digital learning and L&D space with what we can pick from marketing and advertising more specifically. So yeah, just happy that it panned out this way.
Absolutely, and it's an important skill. We talk a lot about how marketing or how learning has evolved, and how it's really important and critical to have the skill to be able to not just hope that people will come and take the learning, but really attract people to come to take the learning.
Yeah.
So let's kind of dive into my first question. Talking about gamification, what is gamification of workplace learning?
Yeah, I mean, there are, of course, many different perspectives on this, and people do get a little lost in the semantics sometimes. I try to think of it as applying something related to game elements, game mechanics into the workplace learning context. And the idea, for me, the outcome or the objective is to improve learner engagement. So if you're able to do that, that would be really gamification of learning, if you're able to apply some of those elements into learning environments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and and I think it also gets us into the conversation. You start to hear the word game, and a lot of organizations start to push back a little, and they get concerned of, we have such a limited budget and such limited time. Are we really going to waste people's time with games? Probably thinking back to a time when we spent a lot of effort trying to keep people from playing games while they were at work, and now trying to change gears and say, okay, this type of game is actually good, like we can actually use this. So it is sort of a mind shift for organizations. And I think some of the things that Amit and I have talked about back and forth is this, how do you think about this? Because the difference between hearing the word gamification and instantly thinking of a game, and I think there is a big difference there in how you approach it. Not that one is right and one is wrong, but there's a difference in how you apply them, and it's important for people to understand that so that they can put it in the right place. And I think people very much get, like, learning leaders get stuck on the game part of it, and think of what they've seen in the past is sort of these clunky little video games that have been inserted into a learning program for almost no reason other than they thought, oh, this is going to be engaging because it looks cool, and that might not really be the sense. So when we talk about this, I'd like to get you to express sort of your take on that difference between games and gamification, so that people understand that.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's something that kind of challenges almost everyone as they get started with the domain of gamification. But before we get there, if I would just take up the types of gamification, because that also is a little bit of a point of confusion for a lot of people. So in practice, you would often find gamification to be referred as points, badges, and leaderboards, which is essentially what you get. It's not a bad place to start. It's usually the easiest, something that you can do more quickly. Maybe platforms can give you that functionality, etc. But that is what you typically would refer to as structural gamification, something that you do around the content. But that also loses its novelty value and enthusiasm pretty quickly. So, if you're doing it for the first time, your learners may be very excited, but it won't carry for next 5 programs or the next 2 years. So you will lose that interest very quickly. So the trick is to bring in real gamification, which is actually going to come from content gamification as opposed to structural gamification. And really the elements of that are having a story, having characters, having emotions, presenting challenges, giving choices to the learners, showing a progress path, giving feedback which is meaningful. Now all of that, if you want to maybe think about, I would say it is what you do to the content, not around the content. And that would really be a more meaningful gamification elements that we typically may not think about usually, but if you combine them with the structural elements, it becomes a very powerful gaming experience. So just a quick nuance take on this, because sometimes we may just get stuck with the PBLs, the point badges and leaderboards. Coming back to what you were asking, David, differentiating between games and gamification. The way I see it is games are typically things that you would do in an environment which is mostly fictitious, and it has its own set of rules, but most of the things that you do in that game may not hold a lot of meaning outside in the real world. So take a game of, let's say, chess. You have those elephants and camels and horses that you have, all of those pieces. They are essentially wooden or ivory pieces outside of that game context, but you will have a lot of significance within that context. If you think of gamification, a good example would be, let's say, something like American Airlines Advantage program, which has included elements of gamification. You do this much, you get this, you reach here, you reach these levels, and you earn this much, etc. And at some point of time, all of us would have really got stuck with some of these loyalty programs, whether airlines or hotels or this. So they have really done well for the purpose they were built. And in fact, I think American Airlines program is something that's been the longest running loyalty program. So if you were to think about the elements of, let's say, between chess and American Airlines Advantage, that would probably give to us the differences between games and gamification.
And besides, those are some good points. Besides the content and the structure, what else makes a compelling workplace gamification program?
So I think everything else really falls under these two categories, in my view. So it could be part of structural gamification strategy that we may have, or content gamification strategy. So what really can make compelling gamification is to focus on the learner engagement. What really makes gamification compelling for the workforce or for the workplaces or employers is to focus on learner engagement. And why I come to that is, we all know that training has not been delivering on its promise, and for many years, the learning transfer is not great, the behavior improvement is not great, or the desired behavior that you want to see is not great. There have been, of course, very eye-catching headlines, the training robbery, which was the HBR article a few years ago. But there is some truth in that, and I think most of your research also highlights that consistently, that learner engagement is really not very high, and it is difficult, both. The way I would see games and gamification are really a way of moving towards that, higher levels of engagement. And it's very interesting that, there's this gentleman who wrote this book called The Game of Work, called by the name of Charles Conrad, who, and in 1984, and he listed out, so he was not looking at gamification at that stage, it was not a buzzword, but he was looking at why and how you engage people at work in general. And he listed out some principles, which is very interesting to see. I would have a list of those. I think, one is about clearly defined goals. The second is about better scorecards and scorekeeping, giving more frequent feedback, providing a higher degree of personal choice, and also giving consistent coaching. Now, all of these, if you take a step back and think, these are all elements that go into a good gamification design as well. And what is interesting also is that he has been referred to as the grandfather of gamification in one of the Forbes article, because of what he postulated in his book in 1984, which is now more loosely referred to as gamification, with a few other elements sprinkled in. So just to summarize that, I think what we're looking at is engagement is probably at the core of any of your gamification activities. And surprise, surprise, a lot of learning theories that support our efforts to create engaging learning actually also support what has been used in games and gamification. It's just that with gamification, you are constrained to follow more of those theories. With learning, you end up, publishing some of it without really being so focused on those. I mean, you can always do bad gamification also if you don't follow those, but chances are that you end up using those theories a little better.
Yeah. And you touched on this, it's very much aligned with our research, and gamification to me, the idea of it really is a microcosm of the bigger things that we look at in learning. This idea of this new vision of the what's in it for me for the learners, this element that's always been missing in learning is companies have just been creating programs, delivering them, tracking how many people finish them without explicitly giving the learners, hey, this is why this is important to you, this is why it matters to you in your role, who you are, and why it matters to the company in general. And that's been missing. And like gamification does that. It provides like an internalized version of that it taps into these intrinsic and sometimes extrinsic motivators of people of what's in it for me, what can I get. In a good way. It sounds bad sometimes when you say it out loud, like what can I get from this? But that's what we're after, is people trying to get something from this. And then you're spot on with the outcomes piece. That's a big part of the big learning picture is companies have to get better at starting with outcomes before they start creating the learning. Like, what are you aiming the learning at? What do you want to happen? And again, like you said, gamification brings that to a micro level of a game doesn't exist without an outcome. Right, that's the whole point. Is it needs to be pointed at something, so it fits really well into the bigger idea of creating learning that's more outcome focused and learning that is more contextual and even personalized, that people have a vested interest in. And engagement isn't about flashing lights and pretty colors, right? Engagement is investment. I am bought in because I know this matters, and I think that's the piece that's been missing in the engagement conversation in the past. It was about the layout of the digital interface, and that UX was engagement, and that's not what it is. It's get someone bought in and invested in this, and I think that's why gamification is so powerful in that context.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Basically what I'm hearing, the compelling theme here, or the compelling message, is that whether it's gamification, social learning, a training program, and a instructor-led training program, it all has to have kind of a similar process or structure to it, and the engagement is critical for whatever you're delivering. The goals and identifying what you're trying to accomplish, that is paramount to what you're building and delivering. So I think, from what I hear and what I see from our research and what companies like you have to offer, it all has to have clear goals, and it all has to involve the learner engagement for it to be successful. So for a gamification in the workplace, it's no different than any other learning program. And perhaps it'll be more engaging if you follow the right recipe.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. The one thing about engagement, just a quick add-on, is that when you're looking at engagement, you are kind of taking away all the other elements, whether it is in a workplace or in a social context or in a community that municipality is trying to do. What you're trying to do is link what you want people to do with some internal drivers, and that is probably the most crucial element when you actually want to do good gamification. So it's okay to add, PBLs, the point badges and leaderboards, and also a few other things. But if you are able to hit on that particular spot, which is able to link to the internal drivers of people, I think you've got a very successful product. And that's why a lot of gamification gurus suggest this, which is play testing and iterating. So they say, you have to test it out with your people and see what is it that they're really engaging with, and maybe discover why, and keep on iterating, because you will hit that sweet spot. You may not hit it on the first attempt. So it is a little iterative that way, but especially if you want to make it really, really good gamification.
What are some of the challenges that you've seen or that companies face when trying to develop these programs?
Okay. So interestingly, just last week we carried out a short poll on LinkedIn asking people, uh, you know, what are their challenges in implementing games and gamification in workplace learning. So the two that stood out is one, the high cost of doing this, and second, the required knowledge and tools or skills and tools are missing. And so which is actually pretty valid. But before we kind of get into that a little bit, I also think there is a bigger challenge, which I think David referred to earlier, which is the perception challenge. And in the organization, if you have to go to your manager or a boss or CEO and say, I want to bring gamification into this learning program, the L&D would quickly be shot down for that, because they have a perception of it. And I would then think it is, at one level, it is a perception challenge, which is at the stakeholders level, but at the L&D level, it is a knowledge challenge, because they are not able to remove that perception or provide the right perception, because their own knowledge is not yet at such a level that they can go with a little bit of conviction and say, no, I'm telling you this is going to work, and this is why it is going to work. This is the theory behind it. These are the examples, etc., etc. So I would think, while it is apparently a perception challenge, it is actually a knowledge challenge at L&D level. And since it is a knowledge challenge at L&D level, the other two challenges are also kind of related. If we don't have enough knowledge, skills are very difficult to build in that area, because you need that push, you need commitment, etc. So it will take some time. Price, I think it's a valid challenge, because something that you want to do really well will need price. I see it this way, that a lot of training dollars are already getting wasted, if we can say, because we're just ticking the boxes in a lot of instances, maybe not all, and some programs are really effective. I see some of the great programs that win Brandon Hall Awards have been doing well, and they're designed very well. So they are doing something better than the, let's say, 99% other programs that are getting created. But still, a lot of programs we may be ending up wasting money on. Gamification, if you do it well, it is going to be expensive, but probably give much, much better results.
Yeah. And some of the things that I've come across in talking to companies are a little bit more sort of nuts and bolts challenges. So, you talk about points badges and leaderboards, and this is an area where if you're going to use those elements, and that's a typical starting point for gamification for most organizations. It's pretty relatively simple, and most learning platforms have some element of it now. But you have to really understand your audience and know what you're after, because what happens, we've seen, like with leaderboards in particular, there's a certain kind of point of diminishing returns in certain audiences where the same 5 people are in the top 5 of the leaderboard all the time, and there's a handful of people who are jockeying for position below that. But then you get to a certain point where the rest of the folks look at that leaderboard and go, well, I'm never going to crack the top 10, so I don't care anymore. And now all of a sudden, it's not only is it not motivating, it's actually somewhat demotivating. So yeah, so it's important to understand the audience and the context within which you're using these points and leaderboards to make sure that they match up. The other element is the incentivization, which kind of is part of games. Like, what do I get for doing this? Am I getting points? Am I getting actual rewards? Whatever it is, are you incenting the right things? And is the incentive tied closely enough with the organization's desired outcome, right? So if there's this thing where it could be a gift card is the reward, or these points are worth something, if people are so hyper focused on that outcome, on that reward, they'll do anything to get there, including short circuit whatever it is they're supposed to be doing in the middle. And so they'll game, so that you get to the other word of game is they'll game the system, and now your outcomes aren't being met, but all of those rewards are being doled out. So it takes a little bit of trial and error sometimes. People with experience work with companies like Emmits, who's got experience building these. They know what things to look for and how to put those in place. But we've definitely heard from some pioneering people, they tried some things and this has happened. They've gone down this road. So just a few things to keep in mind when you're looking at these.
Absolutely. And I think that's a real a good feedback from people who've tried it and they've experienced it. And the way while you're designing the program, it is important to focus on, like you mentioned, what do you want to achieve out of it? So it's very important to incentivize the right actions. So for instance, instead of giving points or badges or rewards for completing a program, you may be giving it for how well you are scoring, or did you generate ideas, did you contribute to something, etc. And another related thing there is, we need to design for some level of competency enhancement rather than winning, and these two may be sometimes different. If it is winning that everybody is focused on, then they will definitely try and game the system. And so we need to build it in the program itself, where the feedback is great, you won, and for the person who hasn't won, it's okay, you didn't win, maybe this is what you really missed, why don't you take a look at this? So what you are saying is, maybe you can give a badge or points for progress that they have made, or the rate of change that you have seen, rather than winning. And of course, as you get into more advanced design, they also say balance it out, so you don't let a runaway winner in any case. So if somebody is taking a big lead, you start putting some obstacles for them, and boost options for others to catch up, etc. So you can do many things, but yes, these are real challenges. Gaming the game is, if you're focusing on winning, is a real possibility, and people will do that. I think that's the great part of it. One of the things that also come out with gamification design and game design is, if you can focus on, and it is closely linked for designing for mastery, is on focusing on replayability. If people are coming back to play it, they are investing a lot more effort in thinking about it and thinking again about it. But there is a high chance that between the two plays, they have reflected on it. So there is a lot of learning that is happening in that. If you are able to do that, that can be a real winner. And one game, and I picked up in one of the other webinars that I have probably watched a few months ago, and I never thought of it that way, that the game like Tetris was never designed for winning. It's designed for failure. Do you remember ever winning Tetris if you played that? And we would have spent so much time. What you are doing is, you're improving yourself again and again and again, but you're not winning ever, because there is no win state in the program. So you are only improving your capability, and that's a good benchmark if you want to do something like that.
It's kind of like, it's boot camp for your mind. There's always another challenge. There's always another point or level that you can get to improving your health and your body. And so I think this is just kind of another way of challenging your mind. There's not necessarily a win-win. Even the one that scores the most or completes the obstacle first, there's another one that they have to. There's always another one. So I think this is it's a really engaging way to kind of have that holistic approach to your mind and your physical and your emotional and all of the above. Let's kind of wrap up here. And there's a lot of good information both of you shared about gamification and examples of it. What are some of the, just if you can summarize, what are kind of some of the key steps that, if someone hasn't gotten started, or even if they're kind of dabbled into it, what should they be thinking about?
Sure. So I think I would first advise they should go and download the ebook that Dave has written for us, the Brandon Hall ebook on workplace gamification.
It's a nice plug-in, thank you.
That's a good starting point. There's another book that our own gamification consultant is working on, so that should be out in a couple of weeks from now. So I think first week of April. So that's a good starting point, just to get a glimpse. But I would think it would be great if people if you really want to develop knowledge, read at least one book on the subject. So I've talked about Game of Work by Chuck Coonrat. Carl Kapp has written a few books, and I love his work. He's also got some LinkedIn courses on LinkedIn Learning. But anyone, a slightly more deeper look into what an author is saying, because a book typically collates so many examples and goes into the deeper stories of why they did and what challenges they face. So there's a lot of learning that can come from there. You may also look at signing up for or following people on LinkedIn, people who are thought leaders in this. They have regular sharing of knowledge and examples, and just reading everybody's comments can refine your own thinking. In fact, I just noticed Carl Kapp also has a newsletter. So if you find him to be a good person to follow, people can go and follow him and follow his newsletter. And if somebody is really interested in getting started, we have tried to do a couple of things by creating gamified frameworks which can help companies create gamified solutions without a lot of time and cost, because the framework is already developed. So there are two areas we focus on. One is gamifying the induction programs with that framework, and there's another framework which allows us to give gamified reinforcements after the programs. And these are both areas where typically we find L&D has higher control, because reinforcements, they typically go on and say this is more of an add-on to the original program, and induction, they are really the stakeholders. But yeah, that's available if people want to get in touch. That's also.
Great, thank you, Amit. And if they want to reach out to you, what's the best way that they can do so?
So my email ID is Amit Garg, full name AMITGARG @upsidelearning.com, and I am on LinkedIn as Garg Amit 100.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Amit. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. This is a great discussion around gamification, fascinating points that both of you made. Have a wonderful day, evening ahead for you, Amit. And from wherever anyone's signing in or listening in, cheers to all of you. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Bye.
Bye, Amit.